Rain clouds hung over Manor like dark velvet drapes stretched across the heavens. The vast estate stood upon a hill, overlooking endless green fields and silver rivers that disappeared into distant forests. Tall stone walls and elegant towers gave the mansion the appearance of a fortress rather than a home. Inside its grand halls, silence ruled. Servants walked carefully over polished marble floors. Their voices rarely rose above whispers. Even the sound of clocks ticking along the walls seemed unusually loud. The reason for this silence had a name: Duke Adrian. At 29 years old, Adrian was one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. He possessed wealth beyond imagination, lands that stretched across counties, and a reputation strong enough to silence rooms the moment he entered them. But he was also known for something else: coldness. People respected him, feared him, and obeyed him. Very few loved him. He had inherited responsibility while still young. The deaths of his parents had forced him to grow into a man long before his heart had finished being a boy. Years of business, politics, betrayal, and noble games had taught him one lesson: trust no one. Unfortunately, that lesson had followed him into marriage. 1 year earlier, Adrian had married now Duchess. Society had celebrated for weeks. Newspapers called her the kingdom's most beautiful bride. Nobles praised the union as perfect. Yet behind decorated smiles and endless dancing, whispers traveled through every ballroom. She married him for his title, for his fortune, for his estates. What young woman would willingly love a man like Adrian? Adrian had pretended not to hear those whispers. But he remembered everyone, especially now. The grand dining room felt emptier than ever despite two people sitting at opposite ends of the long table. Golden candles flickered beside silver dishes and crystal glasses. Sat quietly beneath the warm light. She looked beautiful even in silence. Her pale blue evening gown flowed gently around her, embroidered with tiny silver flowers. Dark brown curls framed her delicate face, and sapphire earrings sparkled softly whenever she moved. But her eyes looked distant, far away. Adrian glanced toward her, while pretending to focus on papers resting beside his plate. She had barely touched her food. Again, over the past few months, he had begun noticing small things he once ignored. She stared out windows for long periods. Sometimes she wandered alone through the gardens at sunset. Sometimes he caught sadness passing through her eyes before she quickly hid it. And twice he had seen tears. Real tears. The first time it happened in the library. The second in the garden. Both times she had wiped them away before realizing anyone had noticed. Adrian folded his newspaper. She looked up immediately. "Yes, you haven't eaten." A small smile appeared on her face. "I am not very hungry tonight." That was all. No further explanation. No complaint. No emotion. Only polite distance. Adrian watched her lower her eyes toward her plate again. Something tightened painfully inside him. Was she unhappy? Did she regret marrying him? Had everyone been right? Perhaps she had imagined marriage to a duke as grand adventures and romance. Instead, she had received him. A man who spent more time with ledgers and meetings than with his own wife. A man who barely spoke. A man who had never once told her what he felt. The thought disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. Later that evening, Adrian walked through one of the manor corridors when voices reached his ears. Several visiting nobles stood near a staircase. They had not noticed him. Poor Duchess. Poor, she has everything. Everything except affection. Soft laughter followed. I hear the Duke barely notices her existence. Perhaps she already regrets becoming Duchess. Adrian felt anger rise in his chest. Not because of the insults toward him, because part of him feared they might be right. He turned away before they saw him. Hours later, he stood alone inside his private study. Rain tapped against windows. Firelight danced across in dark wooden walls. His trusted physician, Dr. William, sat nearby holding a cup of tea. "You asked to see me, Your Grace." Adrian stared into the fire. "I need your assistance." The doctor looked surprised. Adrian rarely asked anyone for help. "What kind of assistance?" Adrian remained silent for several moments. Then he spoke quietly. "I want to know the truth." "The truth about what?" "My wife." Doctor blinked. Adrian stood and walked toward the window. "I need to know whether truly cares for me." The doctor nearly dropped his cup. "You cannot be serious." Adrian continued speaking. "I have spent a year wondering whether she loves me or merely endures me." "Your Grace." "I have already decided." The physician stared at him in disbelief. Adrian turned. His expression remained calm. "Too calm. There will be a hunting trip in 3 days." Doctor slowly realized what Adrian meant. "No. Afterward, the household will be informed that I suffered a terrible accident." "No. I will appear unconscious." "No." Doctor stood. "Absolutely not." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "It is madness. I simply wish to observe people honestly. By pretending to be dying, people reveal themselves around the weak." The physician rubbed his forehead. "And where exactly do you intend to hide while conducting this absurd experiment?" Adrian looked toward a wall behind his desk. Doctor followed his gaze. Behind the bookshelf existed an old concealed passage connected to several rooms within the estate, including the Duke's bedchamber. The doctor's eyes widened. "Oh no." 3 days later, Manor erupted into panic. Servants ran through hallways. Carriages arrived rapidly. Voices filled the estate. The Duke had suffered a terrible accident during the hunt. The official report claimed his horse had lost control. Doctors claimed severe injuries. Doctors claimed uncertainty. Doctors claimed the Duke had fallen into a coma and hidden behind the walls of his own manor. Adrian watched everything. He expected greed. He expected false concern. He expected masks to fall. But what he did not expect was she refused to leave his bedside. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. She sat beside him holding his hand. Sometimes she read books aloud. Sometimes she brushed his hair away from his forehead. Sometimes she simply sat in silence. Late that night, Adrian heard her soft voice. "I do not know if you can hear me." She looked down at his still hand, resting between hers. "You work too much." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "And you are terribly stubborn." Her voice trembled. "I used to imagine what you would be like before our marriage." Silence. "I thought perhaps someday you might look at me the way husbands look at wives they love." Adrian felt his chest tighten painfully. Then he saw tears fall onto her hands. Real tears. Not forced. Not false. And for the first time since beginning his foolish test, doubt entered his own heart. Hours later, finally left the room. The candles burned low. Darkness covered the estate. Adrian prepared to leave his hidden passage. Then he saw movement. The bedroom door slowly opened. A young maid stepped inside. Usually quiet and nearly invisible among the servants. She carefully looked around. Then she quietly approached the Duke's bed. Adrian narrowed his eyes, glanced toward the doorway one last time. And then she reached into her pocket. Adrian remained frozen within the darkness of the hidden passage. The narrow opening behind the wall allowed him only a small view of his bedchamber, but it was enough. Stood beside his bed. The young maid's hands trembled slightly beneath the candlelight. She was usually impossible to notice among the dozens of servants working throughout Manor. She moved quietly, spoke little, and kept her eyes lowered whenever nobles passed. Tonight, however, something about her was different. Fear. Real fear. Adrian watched her carefully, slowly reached into the pocket of her gray servant dress, and removed a folded piece of paper. For several moments, she simply stared at it. Then, with shaking fingers, she bent down and carefully slid it beneath his pillow. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Forgive me," she whispered. Adrian narrowed his eyes, swallowed hard. "I never wanted this to happen." His heartbeat quickened. What did she mean? The maid quickly wiped her eyes and hurried toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one final time toward the unconscious Duke lying upon the bed. Then she disappeared. Silence returned. Adrian remained still for several seconds. Then several more. Finally, he quietly pushed open the hidden panel and stepped into his own room. Moonlight spilled across the floor. He approached the bed and reached beneath the pillow. The folded paper rested there. He unfolded it immediately, but his eyes narrowed in confusion. The page contained only a few words. "I am sorry." Nothing more. No explanation. No signature. Nothing. Adrian stared at it. That made no sense. If wished to confess something, why leave a meaningless note? Unless someone might discover it. Unless she feared writing the truth. He folded the letter slowly. Questions filled his mind. The next morning, the manor remained crowded with visitors. Relatives who rarely visited suddenly arrived with worried expressions. Distant cousins appeared. Noble acquaintances sent flowers. Concerned faces filled the halls. Adrian secretly observed all of them from hidden passages throughout the estate. Many behaved exactly as expected. His elderly aunt cried loudly enough for everyone to hear. A cousin repeatedly asked doctors about inheritance laws. Another relative seemed strangely interested in financial documents. Adrian had expected such behavior, but continued disturbing him. Throughout the day, he noticed odd things. Very odd things. She dropped dishes after hearing sudden noises. She kept looking over her shoulder. She seemed distracted. At one point, she entered the library while believing herself alone. Adrian watched from a concealed opening nearby. Walked directly toward a cabinet containing household records. She looked around nervously. Then she opened one drawer and placed something inside. Moments later, footsteps approached. Immediately stepped away and pretended to dust shelves. Adrian frowned. Later that evening, another strange event occurred. Near sunset, he watched walk quietly into the garden. Rain clouds had returned, covering the sky in soft gray shadows. She moved toward the rear gate of the estate where few servants traveled. Then Adrian saw someone standing beneath a tree. A man wearing a dark coat and hat. His face remained hidden. Approached him nervously. They spoke too quietly for Adrian to hear. But he saw enough. The maid looked frightened. Very frightened. The man handed her something small. She shook her head immediately. The man stepped closer. Looked as though she might cry. Then she quickly turned and hurried back toward the manor. The man disappeared into the darkness. Adrian stared after him. His suspicion grew heavier. Who was he? And why would a servant secretly meet strangers? Night arrived once more. Like previous nights, returned to Adrian's bedside. She wore a simple pale dress tonight rather than one of her expensive gowns. Her hair had partially fallen from its elegant arrangement. Dark shadows rested beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted. Adrian watched quietly from behind the hidden panel, sat beside him, and gently took his hand again. For a long time she said nothing. Only silence filled the room. Then she spoke softly. "I think everyone believes I am strong." Her voice sounded tired. "But I am not." She looked downward. "I never have been." Adrian felt something twist painfully inside him. Smiled sadly. "It is strange." She gently brushed her fingers across his hand. "People believe I married you for wealth." She laughed quietly. A broken laugh. If they only knew. She looked toward the window. "When I first heard stories about Adrian, everyone called him cold." Her eyes softened. "But I saw something different." Adrian stared. "I saw a man carrying responsibilities no one should carry alone." Tears slowly filled her eyes. "I admired you long before our marriage." Adrian stopped breathing. "I married you because I wanted to know you." Silence. "But after our wedding." She lowered her head. "I began thinking perhaps I had made a mistake." His chest tightened painfully. Not from anger. Fear. Wiped tears from her cheeks. "Not because I stopped caring." She looked toward him. "But because I believed you never cared at all." The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Too heavy. "I thought perhaps I was simply decoration in your life." More tears fell. "And I tried convincing myself that did not hurt." Adrian slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time since beginning this foolish plan, guilt entered him like a knife. He had spent so much time questioning his feelings. He had never once considered his own failures. Never once considered how lonely she might feel. Hours later, finally kissed his forehead gently before leaving. "I miss you," she whispered. The door closed softly behind her. Adrian remained standing in darkness. He felt ashamed. Ashamed of his suspicions. Ashamed of his test. Ashamed of himself. But still troubled him. After midnight, he quietly entered the library. Moonlight stretched across books and furniture. He walked toward the cabinet where it had hidden something. Opening the drawer, he searched carefully. Then he found it. Another folded letter. His expression hardened. Slowly he opened it. As his eyes moved across the page, the color disappeared from his face. "My family lost everything because of Lord Edmund. Years ago, his lies and greed destroyed us. I came to this estate wanting revenge." Adrian's hands tightened. "Lord Edmund." "His uncle." "But Duchess showed me kindness when she had no reason to do so. And I learned the Duke was not the monster I imagined." I wanted to stop. Adrian read faster. Then suddenly, his entire body went cold. The hunting accident was not an accident. I overheard conversations. Someone placed poison in the Duke's drink before the hunt. Someone believes he is dying. Someone plans to finish what was started. Adrian slowly lowered the paper. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Footsteps suddenly echoed somewhere outside the library. Adrian looked toward the doorway. Then another terrifying thought struck him. If someone truly poisoned him, then that person still believed he was unconscious. And somewhere inside Manor, someone was preparing to kill him. Outside the library windows, thunder rolled across the distant sky. Wind pressed rain against the glass, and shadows stretched through the halls of Manor. Someone had poisoned him. Someone inside his own world had wanted him dead. And worse, that person believed the Duke of was still lying helpless in bed. Adrian folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat. For the first time in years, real fear settled into his chest. Not fear for his title, not fear for his wealth. Fear for if someone desired control of, then could become a target as well. He immediately sought. Near dawn, he found her in a small servant room near the kitchens. The moment she saw him standing in the doorway, every color disappeared from her face. The tray in her hands crashed onto the floor. Plates shattered. She stared as if she had seen a ghost. "You." Her lips trembled violently. "You are alive." Adrian stepped inside and quietly closed the door. "Lower your voice." Backed away. "No." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "No, no, no. You knew something." She shook her head desperately. "I never wanted anyone hurt." "Then tell me the truth." "I cannot." Her breathing grew uneven. "If you say nothing, someone else may die." She looked down. Silence filled the room. Then suddenly she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I heard them arguing near the hunting cabins." Her voice shook. "There were two men." Adrian remained still. "I only recognized one voice." She looked up slowly. Adrian saw terror in her eyes. "Lord Victor." Adrian felt cold. "Victor." His cousin. Victor had spent years smiling at family gatherings, speaking warmly, laughing loudly, and behaving like a loyal friend. Victor had also spent years drowning in debts, years making failed investments, years asking for financial help. And Adrian had refused him more than once. Pieces suddenly began connecting in Adrian's mind. Inheritance, money, the title, everything. Storm clouds covered the sky by evening. Rain continued falling against Manor. Adrian made his decision. He would not reveal himself yet. If Victor believed the Duke remained unconscious, then eventually he would make a mistake. So Adrian remained hidden and helped him. Over the following day, they quietly gathered evidence. Servants had noticed strange meetings. One stable worker remembered Victor speaking privately with unknown men. Another remembered seeing Victor near Adrian's belongings before the hunting trip. Slowly the truth gathered itself. But Adrian's greatest pain did not come from betrayal. It came from every day she remained beside his bed. Every day she looked more exhausted. Every day guilt pressed harder against Adrian's heart. Because he now understood something terrible. While he had been testing his love, she had already been giving it. Completely. Without conditions. Without demands. Without games. Late that night, the opportunity finally arrived. Victor had gathered several relatives in Manor's grand drawing room under the excuse of discussing estate matters. Candles flickered around the room. Rain battered the windows. Thunder shook distant walls. Hidden behind another passage entrance, Adrian watched. Sat quietly nearby, still pale from worry. Victor stood near the fireplace. His expression appeared serious. Concerned. Perfectly convincing. Until entered. The moment Victor saw her, his face changed. Only for a second. But Adrian saw it. Fear. His hands trembled. She stepped forward. "I have something to say." Victor's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Swallowed hard. Then she looked toward everyone. "The Duke's accident." Victor moved immediately. Too quickly. Enough. His voice exploded through the room. Everyone stared. Victor realized his mistake almost instantly. But it was too late. Stepped backward. He poisoned the Duke. Gasps filled the room. Victor's face twisted with rage. Liar. He suddenly grabbed his arm. Be careful what accusations you make. Cried out. Victor pulled her closer. One word from a servant means nothing. Then, a calm voice echoed through the room. Perhaps. Silence. Absolute silence. Victor slowly froze. His eyes widened. Every face turned toward the entrance. Adrian stepped forward from the shadows. Alive. Very much alive. Several people screamed. One elderly aunt nearly fainted. Victor stared as though death itself had appeared. No, he whispered. No. Adrian walked forward slowly. Did you truly think I would never wake up? Victor stepped backward. His face had gone white. Evidence was presented. Letters, witness statements, servant testimonies. Within minutes, Victor's confidence collapsed. Soon guards escorted him away while he shouted desperate denials. But Adrian barely heard any of it. Because was staring at him. Not with relief. Not with joy. With pain. Real pain. Everyone slowly left the room. Soon only Adrian and remained. Silence stood between them. Then spoke. Very softly. You were never unconscious. Not a question. A statement. Adrian looked down. You tested me. Tears filled her eyes. Adrian stepped closer. I can explain. Why? Her voice cracked. Why was trusting me harder than losing me? The words struck harder than any blade. Adrian could not answer immediately. Because there was no excuse. Only truth. He looked directly at her. Because I spent my life believing love always came with conditions. Tears stood in his own eyes now. I was afraid. He lowered his head. I was afraid nobody could love Adrian. His voice grew quiet. Only the Duke. Silence followed. Then stepped closer. Very slowly she touched his face. You foolish man. Fresh tears escaped her eyes. I never wanted the Duke. A tiny smile appeared. I wanted you. Months later, Manor no longer felt cold. Laughter filled halls. Music returned. Sunlight seemed brighter. Even servants smiled more often. Received justice and a new beginning free from the burdens of her past. And one evening, during a grand celebration beneath crystal chandeliers, Adrian held close as they danced. Soft music surrounded them. He smiled gently and whispered, I pretended to sleep to discover who loved me. He pressed his forehead softly against hers. And I nearly slept through the greatest love of all. Laughed through happy tears and rested her head against his shoulder while they danced beneath the lights. And for the first time in many years,